What are your night shift horror stories? Oh man. I hate recalling this story. I work night shift at a rehab facility. We have a protected gate with a camera looking down from above and one of those doorbell cameras. In the office. The camera monitor is on one wall and the doorbell monitor is on another. I was doing some paperwork and see this guy walk past. Stopped for a few seconds. Then slowly turned around. Walked back and stared up at the camera. And he kept staring. The facility is in a rough neighborhood, so I'm fairly used to folks hanging out around the gate and usually ignore it. But the way he was staring was off-putting. Like, his eyes and expression were hollow and dead. Almost as if he were in deep thought about something horrible. I was pretty sure he was zonked on synthetics. I used the intercom to see if he was okay, but he just kept staring directly at the camera. We have a rule: if it's not hurt or trying to come through the fence, just let it be. No sense in engaging needlessly with somebody potentially hostile or fricking with the locals. Y'all. He stood there and stared at that camera for 2 hours. That same dead-eyed expression staring right at me. Which only creeped me out more. This didn't become a horror story until recently, but as a teen, I used to close down the gas station truck stop I worked at. Alone. My boss used to pop up out of the shadows as I was closing down the till with the backup lights on. He'd be super calm and act like it wasn't creepy at 11 PM when he should be home with his family. He was even at my high school graduation. He and his wife's number's still in my phone. Anyhow. He is currently on trial for murdering a prostitute via stabbing her to death. Back in '94. Cold case potentially solved via DNA and AMP, modern science. Worked at a liquor store for a few years. One of the homeless guys, probably late 50s, that stood outside would ask for money, and 9 times out of 10 if they said no, he'd flash them his old wrinkly crusty package. Had to chase him off every night so people didn't have to suffer that sight. Annoyingly, people who saw me chasing him off or threatening to call the cops often gave me dirty looks, like as if I hated homeless people or treat them like trash. When in actuality I was saving them from that which you cannot unsee. Worked a parking garage at the airport. Some guy left a broke down beater with a couple animal carcasses in the back to rot. Not mine, but I used to work at a small hotel and the manager there told me a terrifying night shift story. It was about midnight when she got a call at the front desk from a man. He said that he's with his 8-year-old daughter who dances competitively and needed advice on what she should wear. She gave him some basic fashion advice. He asked my manager, what about fishnet leggings? Do you think those are too sexy? Then proceeds to talk in graphic detail about how he thinks his own daughter has been trying to seduce him for weeks and how he's starting to enjoy seeing her dance in these cute outfits. Meanwhile, my manager is looking through a computer system trying to figure out who this man is so she can call the cops. However, the room he was reportedly in was empty. The man ends up hanging the phone up before she could find out where he was truly calling from. A couple months later at around 11 PM, my manager answers a desk phone. A familiar voice asked her if she could help him pick out an outfit for his daughter's next dance recital. She asked him, "Let me guess, you want to know if she should wear fishnet leggings?" The man immediately hangs up the phone. I used to work night shift as a care aide in an old folks home. It was already creepy. The home was an old hospital that was converted. Some ass kept walking around the courtyard after dark dressed as a grim reaper knocking on doors. It was actually really scary. He ran off and the facility got a security guard for a few weeks. Was an orderly in a hospital. 2 of us were sitting in the basement office adjacent to the morgue. A guy passed our office. Looking at us a little shifty. Came back again and asked if we had access to the morgue. We said yes, thinking he was doing a pickup for a funeral home. But that seemed strange given it was around 12 o'clock to 12:30 a.m. Nope. He wanted to pay us to let him in. And leave him alone with the bodies for an hour. We escorted him up to security. Apparently he had tried it in the past. As security knew him. Warning. Medical gross stuff incoming. I worked in an emergency room. The worst night that comes to mind involves a patient that was bitten by a baby timber rattlesnake. He was bleeding out of every single orifice by the time he got to us. More blood than I'd ever seen before outside of a motorcycle vs 75 mph head first to asphalt. I don't remember how many doses of Crawford we gave him, but it was the hospital's entire supply. But trying to get him stabilized, arranging the helicopter transport to a bigger and better equipped facility. All the blood. Those weren't the worst parts. The worst part was when the patient lost control of his bowels. I will never, ever forget that smell. I spent the entire time standing by the door with a battery-powered fan and a handful of gauze pads saturated with cinnamon oil trying to reduce some of the smell. The doctor occasionally stuck her head out just so I could waft the cinnamon oil in her face. Yes. By some miracle, the patient did end up surviving. And as far as I know he made a full recovery. But the blood, the smell, and just the shock of it all. Yeah. Never underestimate a baby timber rattlesnake. Was running the register at 24-hour supermarket. Stock person comes running in to produce carrying mop handle screaming "You motherfricker." Out of sight. He keeps yelling "fucker" and smacking handle at something. For like 5 minutes. I am ringing up customers. And freaking out because he was losing his mind. But I am not interested in getting involved in a murder. So I ignore it. Later I find out he was chasing a rat. Many years ago I briefly had a job that started at 3:30 am. The job itself was very boring. But the commute was wild. The world is at its weirdest in the very early morning. Road hazards haven't been called in yet. So one day I pulled off the freeway and discovered that the off-ramp was completely flooded. Deep enough that I have no idea how my car didn't stall. But the most interesting discovery was that if law enforcement has to raid a home, they do it around 3 or 4 in the morning because that's the best chance of everyone being peacefully asleep. One day I was nearly to work when I noticed something off ahead of me. I slowed down and came up to a massive police blockade. Squad cars everywhere and absolutely crawling with heavily armed officers. But all in absolute silence. They silently waved me down a side street. Just a creepy, unsettling experience. Did hospital security for about 2 months. It was small hospital out in the sticks, so we were responsible for removing patients who had passed from their rooms and transferring into the morgue freezer. We had just brought a dissident to the morgue and right before we were about to transfer them to the freezer their cell phone rang. Granted. Pretty tame compared to some stories. But at the time it gave us a decent fright. Work in the winter for me is plowing and snow removal. It was late and I had been out for over 24 hours at this point. Pulled over into a small cul-de-sac with the nearest house being over a 100 yards away so I could let the truck stay on so I could stay warm. 6-wheel Mac things loud as I'm nodding off. There was a very loud bang and it felt like someone then pulled on my driver's side door handle. Luckily I always lock my truck doors. I immediately threw on every strobe rear headlight and started looking around and I saw absolutely nothing. It scared the poop out of me. Needless to say I never sleep anywhere other than lit parking lots. Now. More of a very weird event. Sometimes work night shifts. One time was going home around 4 am or so. It was pitch dark outside and very quiet. Person on a bike came out of nowhere. Said he remembered me from middle school, even said the right school name. And rode off. Worked as an evening manager at a major Hilton property. Got a complaint from a bunch of guests about the noise coming from one of the rooms. Turns out, a drunken man was beating the poop out of his wife and had the door barricaded so we couldn't get in. I called the cops. And they had to get into the room using the balcony from the next room over. I'm still traumatized by what I saw when they finally arrested him and got the wife out of the room. She was covered in blood. It was horrifying. Used to work night shift at a 24-hour Walmart. Customers are nuts enough in the daytime. But they become weird after midnight. Once had an elderly guy come in wearing only a jean jacket and fishnet stockings. He came up to my register, leaned in, and asked if we carried anything to get rid of lice. Those plastic barriers all stores have now to protect cashiers? They need to keep those even after the pandemic ends. I lost count of the times customers got into my personal space to ask about products for fleas, lice, rashes, etc. I was once staying late doing some scenic painting in a college campus theater. It was late. Pitch black dark outside and very quiet in the building. A few of us were up on the stage. Not really talking. Just taking care of business when suddenly I saw out of the corner of my eye something go very quickly by the open door to the lobby. WTF? Then it went by again and I actually saw what it was. A guy with long hair. Wearing pajamas. And no socks or shoes. He was tiptoeing in a very exaggerated way. Pulling his knees up very high. And grinning. WTF? Exclamation point. It sounds kind of funny but it was creepy as hell. We all made eye contact and one of the other painters was just about to go shut the door when the dude walked right in. He stood there staring at us for a full minute. You could have heard a pin drop. He threw his arms out to the sides dramatically and said, "I am your savior." Jesus Christ, no one responded and he eventually walked out. The door was promptly shut and locked behind him and security called. They were not impressed. Turns out that he was a patient at some sort of group home nearby and had done this multiple times. Was walking through the simulation lab for nursing students at the hospital I work at on very little sleep. All the lights were off and it was my first time working night shift. Turned a corner and saw what I thought was a person standing behind a lamp that was on. Turns out it was a mannequin holding the pull cord. Really freaked me out and I was awake after that. I was closing supervisor at a grocery store and someone managed to poop between the bathroom and the exit doors at 8:59. We close at 9 o'clock. You'd think, oh, there's literal poop on the floor, surely people will walk around it. No, instead they continue to plow through it, so now there's poop on multiple grocery carts. The exit is scattered with feces. There's poop on people's shoes undoubtedly. And there's poop in the parking lot. Luckily for me, my less squeamish supervisor working with me that closing night volunteered to mop up the exit and bathroom, which to our surprise had also been poop on. For the record, human poop makes me immediately gag and vomit when I get a whiff of it, so I ended up puking in the trash next to the poop exit. Worked at a distress center almost 10 years ago. Was on the 12 AM to 6 AM shift. Got about 2 phone calls each hour of the shift from the same guy saying that he's tied up in a room. His balls are tied up with leather straps. And his wife is getting banged by 5 giant black guys in the other room. Asked him each time if he's in distress and he says no every time. Kept telling him if he's not in distress then he shouldn't be calling and let him go. I just can't believe he was up from 12 to 6 AM to make those calls. One of the managers came through the drive-thru at 4 in the morning, pissed and ordered an absurd amount of food and then vomited out the window of whoever's car it was onto the drive-thru. Turns out she was the manager that was starting at 7 and she said not to worry about the vomit and that she'd clean it up when she started. The amazing thing is that she arrived on time and cleaned it up. Not a horror story for me, but sure as hell one for her. Overnight at the supermarket. Man stole the live lobsters and ran out of the store with them in his sweat pants. Like all in his pants. Lobsters falling out of his pockets. Out of the cuffs of his pants. Etc. Night manager running after him yelling. It was quite a sight. Also, one morning the newspaper delivery guy came to drop off the newspapers at 4 AM and some rando guy that seemed to be on drugs that I had just cashed out jumped in the newspaper guy's car and took off. Night manager chased him as he sped off. Working late at an ice rink. I'm a Zamboni driver. It's a local rink with 2 sheets of ice. I get a phone call from my coworker. He's calling me on the Zamboni. It's loud but I can clearly hear him yelling there is blood. A lot of blood. Oh god. And he hangs up. So I start running. I tear into his arena and the ice is covered in blood. Like Seriously, so much. Then I realized how stupid we were. Well, him more than me. When he started resurfacing the ice, a hydraulic line to his board brush blew and started spewing out red hydraulic fluid. Looked like crimson blood on the ice. I ran onto the ice and told him to pull off. He was frazzled and driving in circles. Since he lost hydrologic pressure, he couldn't pull his conditioner up when trying to get off the ice. Ruined the blade on the Zamboni, but there wasn't much else he could do. Can't leave it on the ice. I told him it was hydraulic fluid, not blood. But he should check for dead bodies around the rink anyway. Best part. After he got off the ice, with fear in his eyes and adrenaline pumping. Hey, can you call our boss and tell him? No. It's 2 in the morning. It broke on you. You have to call him. That's how it works.
Hi there. Look, if you enjoyed the video, well, why not go ahead and hit that like and subscribe to Reddit Stories. In fact, if you want to see even more responses to this thread, well then, take a look. There's the link in the description below. And remember, show some love to those authors while you're there. And I look forward to seeing you next time.